Let's jump right into today's explainer. We're looking at a story that, honestly, on the surface, feels like a really quirky, maybe even a little surreal fable. But underneath, it actually teaches us a profoundly deep lesson through, well, a very unusual baked good. We're going to dive into the source text of The Bread Man. It's this wild little short narrative that explores the human condition, the literal magic of creation, and the frankly bizarre negotiations we make for companionship. It's a perfect example of how the simplest stories often hold the most fascinating insights. So let's get into it.
Here's a question for you. How far would you actually go to cure loneliness, right? It's one of those universal driving forces in the human experience. And before we introduce our surprisingly endearing and, I gotta say, deliciously doughy protagonist, we really need to ground ourselves in that feeling. The craving for connection pushes people to do extraordinary, totally unexpected, and sometimes, frankly, unconventional things. Just keep that deep, core human need in mind as we set up the foundation for today's story.
Okay, so our story begins with this incredibly stark reality. Many years ago, there was a lonely woman. She had no one. The source material doesn't give us her name, it doesn't give us her age or her background. It just strips away all of that to focus entirely on her defining state, which is this profound, crushing isolation. She lived completely alone in an entire house. Just pause and imagine that for a second. The echoing silence of a whole house with literally no one else in it. It really establishes this somber, super relatable foundation for everything that's about to happen. Her environment is vast, and her world is just empty.
Now, instead of just wishing for a child to watch her bake, she takes a really unusual action. One day, while making bread, she had this simple, modest thought. She just wished there was a child in the house who could watch her. You know, a deeply nurturing, domestic desire. But she doesn't just sigh and move on. No, she actively shapes her dough into the form of a man. She channels that deep desire for companionship into a literal physical creation. It's this beautiful, if maybe slightly melancholic, baking project that totally sets the stage for the impossible.
And what happens next is just an absolute miracle, and it escalates so fast. She puts the man-shaped bread into the oven. Just a normal, everyday act, right? But then, literally 15 minutes later, the impossible happens. She hears the cry of a child coming from inside the hot oven. I mean, imagine the shock. She quickly opens the door, and right there, her creation has actually come to life. The dough turned into a man. It's a miracle, but it instantly turns into pure chaos because the bread man jumps out of the oven and just bolts.
Stop! Bread man! Stop! The source text gives us this fantastic, totally frantic piece of dialogue. You can just picture the sheer panic and desperation here. She finally has the companion she was just wishing for, the cure to her echoing house, and her very first interaction with him is a high-speed foot chase. She is sprinting right after her freshly baked, fleeing creation. It's super dramatic, but also kind of deeply comical when you realize she's actively chasing a living carbohydrate right across her kitchen.
But the bread man shouts back, "No, if I stop, you will catch and eat me." And look, when you view it from his point of view, you have to admit it makes complete and total sense. He is a living piece of food. He literally just woke up inside a scorching hot oven, which, let's face it, is the traditional place where food goes right before it gets consumed. His perfectly logical perspective is just pure survival. Why wouldn't he run? To him, his creator is his ultimate predator.
So, let's pause the narrative right here at the climax. How do you stop a fleeing bread man? Seriously, if you were the woman in this bizarre scenario, how are you negotiating with a runaway baked good? You obviously can't reason with him about his nutritional value, and clearly chasing him is only confirming his absolute worst fears. You need a strategy to somehow de-escalate the situation and build immediate trust with a creature whose literal existence is meant for a dinner plate.
Okay, now here is the incredibly unexpected twist directly from our source text. The woman promised the bread man that she would eat him. I know, right? It is a wonderfully absurd verbatim twist. She doesn't promise to keep him safe. She doesn't promise they'll be a happy family. No, she promises the exact literal thing that he is terrified of. It is an utterly baffling negotiation tactic. She's literally confirming his worst fear as a promise.
But incredibly, this totally counterintuitive strategy works immediately. The bread man stops, and the woman brings him home. Her strangely threatening promise is actually a massive success. The grand chase comes to a sudden, peaceful halt. Now, why does this work? Well, maybe because in a world where bread comes to life, the ultimate validation of a bread man's purpose is to be eaten. Or perhaps, by making a firm promise, even a terrifying one, she established a bond of absolute truth. Whatever the internal logic of this fable is, the strategy works, and she's finally able to bring him home.
And that brings us to their surprisingly happy life together. The source text tells us that the bread man roamed around the house, he played with the woman, he made various demands. He honestly acted exactly like the lively, slightly demanding child she had originally wished for when she was first mixing her dough. Her empty house was finally filled with energy and movement and interaction. Because of her doughy companion, the woman no longer felt lonely. That huge void in her life was completely cured.
So the absolutely crucial point here is the core moral that the source text leaves us with: keep your word. It's fascinating, really. The story doesn't explicitly focus on whether she actually ate him or not down the line, but it centers everything on the power of a promise. It shows us that to maintain a bond, to cure loneliness, and to keep trust, you absolutely must honor the agreements you make, even if that agreement is the strangest, most absurd promise in the entire world. Your word is the bedrock of your relationships.
I want to leave you with one final thought today. What promises have you made to cure your own loneliness? We might not be out here baking companions out of dough, but every single day we make compromises, we make unexpected commitments, and we offer our word to others just to build a bridge across our own isolation. It so beautifully connects the fantasy of a running bread man right back to our very real, everyday human need for connection. So think about the promises you've made, and more importantly, think about whether you've kept them. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.